All right.
So, good day, everyone, and welcome to Bright Light News. I'm Tanya Kazal, and we are honored to have as our very first guest the esteemed Canadian constitutional lawyer, Rocco Galati. So, welcome, Rocco, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Tanya.
Now, Rocco, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Oh, well, I'm not used to talking about myself. I've been practicing law for 31 years. I'm a constitutional lawyer. I only do cases against the government, and I've done some doozies in my career. I single-handedly constitutionalized the Supreme Court in the Nadon reference. I challenged Justice Nadon's seat on the Supreme Court, which ended in a 7-0 decision that said that if they can't do anything to the Supreme Court without the unanimous consent of all 10 provinces. In 2012, I had 17 federal court judges fired who were sitting per diem past the age 75, a corrupt practice that had been going on since 1927. In 1999, I was co-counsel on a case called Baker that rewrote administrative law that decided that anytime a government official made a decision that affected your life or livelihood, they had to give you written reasons. Prior to that, they could just say no, and they're not required to give you reasons. So you can never go to court when the government denied you something because you had no basis to go to court. So that's the kind of work I do. It's mostly Superior Court and Appellate Court and Supreme Court work. You know, I'm a former bencher of the Law Society. I've been named twice one of the top 25 lawyers in the country by Canadian Lawyer magazine. And in 2015, I was the recipient of the Ontario Bar Association's President's Award, which is the most prestigious award given by members of the bar. I was the first lawyer to get that. Prior to me getting that award, only judges and organizations had been recipients. So I was the first lawyer to get that award.
Can we start with what the role of the government is?
So governments, while they're supposed to reflect the will of their citizens and the democratic process and protect their citizens, spend most of the time doing the opposite. Governments need to be feared and mistrusted. And I mean, a lot of constitutions, that's why they have bills of rights and charter of rights. The charter of rights is there to protect the citizens of Canada against the government. That's why it's there. If governments didn't commit these atrocities against their own citizens, we wouldn't need a charter of rights. Okay?
Right, thank you. Now, Rocco, can you tell me which constitutional rights and freedoms have been violated?
Well, how long is this broadcast?
Okay,
First of all, they have violated the constitutional right that's been in place since 1688 under the English Bill of Rights, which is read into our Constitution, of dispensing with Parliament under the pretense of royal prerogative. So they're governing now through ministerial and cabinet orders, and they've basically dispensed with Parliament. Number one constitutional infringement. And that's structural. That's not under the Charter. They can't do a Section 33 override or claim reasonable limit under Section 1 of the Charter. That is a structural breach that they cannot cure. Number two, they've relinquished the duty to govern by dispensing of Parliament, which is another structural constitutional breach. Number three, they've abused their authority because if you look at the legislation in Ontario, for example, in order to call an emergency, you have to have two prerequisites. They didn't meet the two prerequisites. So they're acting illegally, totally renegade. So past that, the measures breach the Charter of Rights, sections 2, 7, 8, 9, and 15. Under section 2, they breach the right of freedom of association, freedom of thought, conscience, expression. Under section 7, they breached section 7 of the Charter to life, liberty, and the security of the person, which includes being hampering your breathing, literally, and telling you how to breathe. without a mask or with a mask. They're going to infringe your Section 7 rights when they bring in mandatory vaccination. Under Section 8, they engaged in unlawful and unreasonable search and seizure of businesses by ordering them closed. So ma and pa hardware stores, clothing stores, shoe stores were closed, but Walmart and Costco got to sell everything under the sun just because they were selling a bit of food in the corner. That makes no sense to me. That's an unreasonable search and seizure of the ma and pa independent businesses. By the way, the Association of Independent Businesses in British Columbia just announced that 21,000 businesses in British Columbia alone have closed down as a result of the COVID measures. Meanwhile, the multinational corporations are doing a booming business, which is part of this agenda. They also are infringing Section 9 of the Charter by these against arbitrary detention by these bylaw enforcement officers who are illegally enforcing the law. So, for instance, the masking law. All the masking laws say that you should wear a mask unless you're exempt. So when people invoke an exemption, that exemption is not being respected. So the people who don't respect the exemption are in fact breaking the law. And so when a bylaw officer or a police officer detains you, or even a store person detains you arbitrarily, and furthermore is not respecting the exemption in the law, that's an arbitrary detention contrary to Section 9 of the Charter. Then you have a vicious, ugly, vile, depraved infringement of Section 15 of the Charter with respect to two vulnerable groups: the physically and neurologically disabled, whether they be adults or children, and the aged, senior citizens. So the physically and neurologically disabled, including and especially children with special needs, while they've imposed the general lockdown and COVID measures on them, they have made absolutely no provision to help these poor kids and these poor adults. And they're left out there to vanquish. Do you think a severely autistic child knows how to interpret? Do you think a mentally disabled adult knows or can adhere to these measures? They have not accommodated them. They have not accommodated them by putting in measures that keep up their social contacts, their places to go and get therapy, and all of that. That is very vicious and very severe. And of course, given that 84% of all people who died from the COVID died in long-term care facilities, their equality rights to be protected under this so-called pandemic have been severely breached, with the vast bulk of the impact falling on them. So those are the charter rights that have been breached.